Hello, I'm here with Jake Sotiriadis, Chief of Strategic Foresight and Futures at U.S. Air Force Headquarters. Jake, it's so great to have you back on IdeaGen TV today. To kick off the interview, we just came off an incredibly challenging 2020 with the situation of the global pandemic. IdeaGen defines dynamic resiliency as an organization with a demonstrated, dedicated ethos focused on fostering partnerships across sectors, resulting in surviving, recovering, and reimagining operations after some of the most challenging circumstances. The ability to see around corners and to reimagine. What does that mean to you, and how would you define dynamic resiliency?
Hey, Cooper, thanks so much for having me on. It's great to be back with IdeaGen for another interview. Really respect what you all are doing, and the mission that IdeaGen has really is so much in line with what my team is working at the Pentagon and Air Force Futures. When you talk about resiliency in the context of 2020 and the pandemic, I think I would really define that as the ability to understand how the future can defy our expectations and core assumptions and present alternatives that we may or may not have considered. And so in order to be resilient, in order to foster this dynamic resiliency as an organization, it's really important to be able to understand the sources of change and disruption in society and be able to envision alternative futures so that we can develop a capacity for anticipatory thinking that ultimately lets us make better decisions or better decision making, in particular when we talk about the realm of national security, which is so critical at this present time.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes complete sense. And thank you for the work you're doing there. It's really honorable. And, as I mentioned before, we're coming off a really challenging year for everyone with the pandemic, and we're still not out of it yet. So, Jake, as Chief of Strategic Foresight and Futures, has the disruption of the COVID-19 pandemic negatively impacted your work and everything you're doing there? And have you noticed that the pandemic might have been needed to use as a push for your sector?
Well, I think we have to take the whole pandemic and what's happened really in context. Certainly, we all lament the terrible loss of life and all of the suffering that our society has gone through and really the world has gone through, especially to those who have lost loved ones, and the extreme stresses that it's put on our medical personnel, frankly, on our children. I have two children who've been in virtual school since last March. So those effects are very palpable to us. But on the other side, we have to say that we've been able to make a remarkable digital transformation as a result of the pandemic. And the pandemic has accelerated many trends that were already out there. It's really turned up the volume on those trends in a major way. And, we're not necessarily going to be able to go back to 2019. We're going to be experiencing a different kind of normal moving forward. And I think to our credit, in many cases, we're embracing that transformation in a myriad of ways. And just for example, in the U.S. Air Force now, this idea of having almost a third of our workforce perhaps being remote in the future. All of the opportunities that opens up to keep people assigned at one location instead of having back-to-back moves. Maybe it opens up opportunities for folks who have been previously underrepresented to take an opportunity to serve in the armed forces. It opens up an opportunity as well for us to really, I think differently about how we've been approaching questions about the future. And I think that's really the value proposition that strategic foresight, which is what my team works on for the Air Force and the Department of Defense. We're really thinking about how the future can defy our expectations. And what we're really trying to do is figure out which weak signals and emerging trends are in the strategic environment today that we can identify, tell a compelling story and narrative, connect those dots that perhaps we're not seeing today, and then try to understand how all of that fits together and overlay that with our strategic planning to ensure that we are prepared and dynamically resilient for any possible future outcome.
Yeah, brilliant. I think you're right. This pandemic has given us a lot of optimism for human ingenuity in the ways we're finding, answers to these vexing problems. Moving on, I saw that you recently published an article titled "The Future of the European Union and Implications for Transatlantic Relations in a Post-COVID World." Could you explain to our audience a little bit more about your article?
Absolutely, Cooper. So the article was actually, it was part of a broader report that my office published back in June of 2020, and that report is called the Global Futures Report. And it's really a collaborative effort. Our office at the Pentagon sponsored the report. We authored, researched it, and published it. But it really shows a dynamic collaboration of a global network of futurist thinkers, ranging from the Middle East to Europe to Hawaii to the Beltway. And it really is, I think, the best of what a team effort represents, in the sense that we had space experts, cyber experts, geopolitical experts, regional experts, other futurists, economists, China experts, and national security practitioners, all working together to build this report, which really looks at 4 global scenarios in a post-pandemic world, and then individually looks at sections that talk about key issues of concern to the defense establishment. So things like competition in space, competition in the cyber realm, disinformation campaigns, China's Belt and Road Initiative, new geopolitical fault lines in the Middle East, and then, as you mentioned, my section that I had also penned about transatlantic relations. And so specifically with regard to Europe, I think this year was so critical in the sense that there were a lot of key issues that are happening on Europe's periphery that we had really not paid attention to, and they hadn't merited as much attention as I think they've needed. So, for example, we now look at the Eastern Mediterranean as an area of critical geopolitical competition and importance, and just how that has shifted, an order of magnitude shift over the last few years, where we have, a crisis within the NATO alliance, a crisis between NATO partners. We see what's happened between some of the more aggressive policies that Turkey has undertaken recently, and sort of the counterbalance between France and Greece and Cyprus and other countries in the alliance now pushing back on some of this aggressive behavior, which really has implications not only for the Eastern Mediterranean, but also for the Middle East and beyond. But other issues like 5G networks in Europe and communications grids, and the fact that we see increased efforts by the Chinese to try to basically get a foothold in many European countries' 5G networks, which is going to give them unprecedented access and influence there, which obviously the United States would like to see not happen. But also things like the refugee crisis that is ongoing as a result of conflicts in the Middle East, an economic stimulus package that was passed by the European Commission last year. However, that still has to actually manifest itself. And we look at the huge unemployment problem, and still the fact that we are not out of the woods yet with the pandemic. And so uneven levels of vaccination, the fact that we just completed this Brexit drama, and also you have this resurgence of authoritarianism and populist movements in countries like Hungary and others in Europe. And of course, we're still not finished with the transition period here in the United States. And so transatlantic relations over the last 4 years have also been quite turbulent, even though obviously the United States has maintained its presence and actually even increased some of its expenditures in Europe. I think we are going to be in a period of renewal. Obviously, in any transition period, there is a bit of a reset. However, I think in this particular moment in history, that will be of a much larger magnitude than we are used to seeing. But overall, I'm optimistic about transatlantic relations, because I still believe, and I think that there are so many indicators out there that we have so much in common, that the European and American alliance, the NATO alliance, is so critical for security and stability, and really to maintain the rules-based international order that's been the bulwark of our national security architecture and strategy over the last 70 plus years. And so from that perspective, I'm very optimistic that the United States and its partners and allies will move forward, I think, in a positive way.
Wow, I think that's really encouraging that somebody in your position is so optimistic about it. I'm glad. And it's a great read, by the way. I would encourage anybody in our audience to check it out. It's The Future of European Union and Implications for Transatlantic Relations in a Post-COVID World. Jake, as you know, here at IdeaGen, we look to foster and create cross-sector collaboration among our community. How have you and your partners/colleagues worked together to persevere throughout this past year?
I think like everybody, we've tried to balance the burden that we've all experienced in our personal lives, whether that's supporting our spouses who are working and being supported as well in our full-time jobs, supporting our children who are now in virtual schools, supporting our teachers, our local communities, not being able to maybe go to our places of worship as often as we'd like to, not being able to see family. All of those things that that we've all experienced this year have certainly affected our team as well. I think where we've been successful is really developing a great system of support for all of us, being able to transition very effectively to digital platforms and really not skipping a beat in terms of delivering the work that we need to deliver to the senior leadership of the Department of Defense. And that's really what I think has really kept things moving for us. It's actually been, despite the disruption of the pandemic, an exciting year for us in the sense that we created our team a little over a year and a half ago, and the demand signal for the kind of work that we're doing in terms of national security futures is just through the roof, which is really a credit to the team and the great work that they've been doing. And also a credit to the leadership for allowing us to have the flexibility to develop these kinds of groundbreaking analyses and then communicate them to a broad audience. The report that I mentioned before has been downloaded thousands and thousands of times. It's now going to become an annual product that will be published and will be shared with really a global audience. That will be an unclassified report in order to foster that collaborative spirit. And so I think one real big success area has been this expansion of public-private sector partnerships, which is so critical to answering our most pressing problems and challenges, because we certainly don't have all of the solutions within our group or our teammates, or even in the security network. We need to expand those horizons and worldviews and really get to a broader diversity of thought, opinions, and frankly, knowledge that we may not necessarily have. And I think it only makes our work, products, and ultimately our assessments much more grounded and diverse and broad when we're able to produce something like that.
Sure, yeah, and I mean that's why we're here, right? As we are hopeful that 2021 will be the start of the post-pandemic world, are there any special projects or reports that you're releasing that our audience can keep an eye out for?
Absolutely. So one of the exciting projects that we're working on right now, Cooper, is taking our futures report, which I mentioned before, looks at 4 global scenarios of geopolitical competition in a post-pandemic world. And we're actually taking that product and we're making a virtual reality, augmented reality version of it. And we're partnering with tech futurist Kathy Hackle, who's just an amazing industry leader in virtual reality, and also with a company called Avatar Dimension. And this product the new version of the report will be released in late January, early February. And so we're really excited to roll this out, because what this actually does is takes future studies and how national security leaders consume information and make decisions, and just actually creates an entirely different platform for doing that. And so it's really the future of future studies, if you will, in terms of how we present information. So we're thrilled to have our wonderful private sector partners and to be really leading change in the national security realm to make this more of the norm, vice the exception. So that's one big thing on the horizon. And then, as I mentioned before, we'll have our Futures Report 2021 that will come out in May of this year. So very exciting things on the horizon.
Yeah, those are surely exciting developments. Jake, thank you so much for joining us today here on IdeaGen TV, presented globally by Microsoft. Really quick, before we let you go, what is your call to action for our global audience as we continue to change the world and continue to be resilient? And how can our global audience find out more about the work that you're doing?
Absolutely. There are a few ways. They are able to go to our website, which is www.afwic.af.mil. And they'll be able to find our report and some other information about the organization there. I'm certainly available on LinkedIn. Just Jake Sotiriadis is my handle. And also, the call to action for this year, I think what's so important to all of us is to, I think, really remain focused on not only this new normal that we're going to all be settling into, but also understanding that sometimes the seemingly improbable can become tomorrow's reality very quickly. And I think that that's one lesson that has become very palpable to us all as a society. And so I think it's very important for us to be able to retain our cognitive capacity to understand how items, how events that may not necessarily be directly in our core focus or directly in our lane of the road still have reverberations and effects on our day-to-day lives and on our organizations moving forward. And so my call to action is to maintain our horizon scanning capability and really have this futures-based mindset to be very intentional in how we're performing our work and understanding how the future can defy our expectations and assumptions.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. Jake, thank you so much for being here today. It was an honor getting to interview you. Until next time.
Thanks so much. Take care.